Welcome to the Lyster Health Talks Podcast, hosted by Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Holt, the commander of Lyster Army Health Clinic and the Health Services Director at Fort Novacell. Each month, listen in as the team focuses their discussion on relevant, relatable content that empowers your health and the readiness of the force. In today's show, Lieutenant Colonel Holt and the team share tips for a safe and healthy summer in the Wiregrass. Join us now for Summer Safety. Don't forget to pack the sunscreen.
Hello, Fort Novacell. This is Lieutenant Colonel Garrett Holt, the commander of Lyster Army Health Clinic. Excited to welcome you back to the Lyster Health Talks Podcast for our next episode. This episode, it is hot outside, so it is time to talk tips for a healthy and safe summer. Our special guest today is Lieutenant Colonel Bart Wilkison. He's a dermatologist and also our new Deputy Commander for Clinical Services. Dr. Latoya Lynn, she's the chief of our pharmacy, and Mr. Rob Pietras, our safety manager at Lyster Army Health Clinic. I want to welcome you all to the show today, and I'm really excited. So let's dive right into the content. It's certainly hot today. Wow, man, I got in my truck, and it's at 103 degrees. Whether that's just the dashboard temperature or the true temperature outside that, plus the humidity down here in lower Alabama is a real thing. And so, you know, we all have lived through hot temperatures before, but I think it's good when you get back into the hot temperatures that you kind of consider. Mr. Pietras, Rob, I know we've spent a lot of hours, you and I, talking as a commander and a safety manager do, talking about summer safety. I bet you could spend a whole hour talking to us about all things that we need to be protecting ourselves from. But given our goal of a 10 to 15 minute show, I want to just maybe hit some high points. So, you know, with the summer upon us, you know, we've got beaches near us. Just interested, maybe if you can kind of give us some high points on water safety and what you have for us in that regard.
Yes, sir. Hey, thanks for having me on today. It's great to be part of my first podcast. So absolutely, it's hot outside. It's dang hot. So what we're going to do when we go down to the beach, have a plan. Just like any other risk assessment, just like you would for a mission. Have a plan, assess the risk, assess the weather, assess the water conditions, have fun most importantly. My family, we love going down to the beach all the time, so just have fun. You
know, you and I were talking about one of my most recent trips down to the beach and how I was swimming out there with a floaty with my daughter, and I realized I looked up and I was a little bit further away from the beach than I realized I was comfortable. So, you know, and those rip currents, they are very real. And, you know, growing up on a lake in Tennessee is much different than the Gulf down there. Any tips?
Yes, sir. Rip currents, look, they're real. And it is not like your average lake or pond that folks are used to. So please respect it. The beaches do have flag systems. They're there. Everything from yellow to double red. Obviously, knee deep is too deep on single red flags. Double red flags, you can get fined for swimming in, sir.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you're swimming with a double red flag, you can get in trouble for it.
See, we don't have the flags in Tennessee, so that's good to know.
Absolutely, sir. And actually, fun fact is you can get information, daily information on the flags by texting PCB flags to 888-777. And that's just for Panama City Beach. So there's other ones for Okaloosa County and different counties. So wherever you're going, plan ahead.
The flag systems, you know, they're out there, but, you know, it's easy to ignore. But, you know, you just got to be very cognizant and vigilant in that regard. Speaking of the season as well, yeah, it's hot, but there's also some, you know, adverse weather that we actually experienced just over the past couple of weeks here. But, you know, talk to me a little bit about, you know, as we're entering into the hurricane season, which also has, I think, some tornadic activity as well as a risk. What are some things we can think about in this for hurricanes and tornado preparation?
Look, hurricanes are real here. Severe weather is real here. High temperatures, you know, help create all of that type of phenomena. The hurricane preparedness, good thing is we have a couple of days notice, 2 to 3 days notice, so we can prepare. Important thing, don't over prepare. A lot of folks will just go buy out the store. That's just not what we should do. That's hurting other people in the long run. So plan for about 3 days, worst case scenario. Anything more than that, there's going to be resources on the ground to help us out through that.
Yeah, over preparation was certainly something I bet my wife would tell you I did a couple of times, as I almost bought all of the generators, but not necessary. And,
right, absolutely.
Got to give kudos to the Fort Novacell team installation. They are on the money with getting after repairing and recovering from any type of event, be it minor or major. So, hey, thanks, Rob. I know we could talk a lot about a lot of things, but I'm going to pass it over to my other guest, Dr. Lynn. Again, Dr. Lynn, welcome. She's the chief of our pharmacy. You know, Dr. Lynn, what's some things from your perspective, from a pharmacy perspective, that folks need to consider in the hot months of lower Alabama?
One thing that I think we should consider that we don't think about a lot is that there are quite a bit of medications out there on the market that actually have ingredients in them that causes what we call photosensitivity. And what that is just an increased sensitivity of our skin when we're exposed, even in limited conditions, and it increases our risk for things like burns, rashes, and other lasting or long-lasting skin irritations. We see this very often with things like our antibiotics, our dermatologic products, even some diabetic medications and cholesterol-lowering medications. I mean, the roster could go on, but I would say the key is just to always speak with your pharmacist about any new medications that you are prescribed and ask the question, is this medication going to be okay for me to take and be in the sun? And if the pharmacist really enjoys what they do, like our pharmacists at Lyster, they'll even go even further to talk to you about some things that you could possibly do to even limit that risk.
Well, that's great. And I got to tell you how much I appreciate all the work that you continue to do for the Fort Novacell community. You guys are rocking it out of the park. I'm going to pass it over to my next guest, Lieutenant Colonel Wilkison. Dr. Wilkison as well is another title that we can give him. He's our staff dermatologist here. And most recently, I want to welcome you to the Deputy Commander for Clinical Services job. As our listeners may remember from our previous episode, our former DCCS, Lieutenant Colonel Erica Murray, was heading off to bigger and better things. And we're just so fortunate to be able to have the leadership, talent, competence, and abilities of Bart Wilkison. So welcome, even though you've been a part of Lyster for a while, but welcome to the leadership team. So yeah, let's pass it over to you. I think the first thing that comes to everybody's mind is sunscreen, but I imagine there's a lot more to it that a dermatologist has for us. So what do you got for us?
Thanks, sir. Just let me say thank you for the kind words there. It's been a great honor to be at Novacell for so long, and then to get this opportunity to come up to the command suite and act as Deputy Commander for Clinical Services. So appreciate that. To your specific question, everyone loves to ask about sunscreen, right? But it's really just one part of a comprehensive sun protection, sun avoidance plan. We'll talk about sunscreen, but I just want to mention some of the other things that people don't really think that much about. One being just avoid the heart of the day, right? So between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., your ultraviolet index is at its height. If you can do your outdoor activities before or after that window, you're going to reduce your risk of sunburn and then years down the road, skin cancer. So avoid the heart of the day. Next thing is, if you got to be out there, seek the shade, right? It kind of goes without saying, but
right.
If you can bring those tents, if you can plan your picnics with a shelter in mind, that's going to serve you well. If you got to be out there during the heart of the day, think about ultraviolet protective clothing. You may have heard that as UPF. There's several brands of clothing that have a UPF factor, and it's similar in nature, but not the same thing as SPF, but it's for clothing, right? So if you can't do those things, if you can't wear long sleeves, long pants, and a hat and sunglasses, which most people aren't going to do down here in Alabama because it's just so hot, then you need to get the sunscreen out, right? Any specific questions about sunscreen?
No, I think those are pretty helpful. I think the first thing that comes to mind, I heard at some point, I don't know if it's a tale or not, but 30 SPF is like the benchmark, and anything above doesn't. I mean, is there any truth to that, or what advice do you have there?
I think the American Academy of Dermatology would love the fact that you anchored on 30, because they put that out as their standard. And the reason that they do that is they really believe that SPF 30 is the minimum. So they want people to remember SPF 30. You can definitely go higher. And the higher the SPF, the better the protection. That's a fact. And just one quick note on SPF, it actually stands for sun protective factor. And I think it's important to know that that's actually a ratio. And what it is when they determine the SPF for a particular sunscreen, they measure how much energy it takes to cause a sunburn without sunscreen, and then how much energy it takes to create a sunburn with the sunscreen. And then they take those two and it turns it into a ratio. So SPF 30 is actually 30 times your skin's normal protective factor. So conversely, 50, 100, that's 100 times your skin's natural ability to protect itself from ultraviolet radiation. So the higher the number, definitely the more protection, but the higher the number, you're also going to pay more, right? And so they want people to not be dissuaded by cost. So SPF 30 provides about 95% filtration of all the ultraviolet radiation. So they're like, that's a great benchmark. If you can go higher and afford it and you want to do that, that's great. But SPF 30 at a minimum.
30 is it? Okay, that's good. I have one more question on sunscreen. So sometimes we use the spray sunscreen versus the actual lotion. And I mean, is there a risk? Somebody told me that, if you spray, then only little dots go on or something. I don't know if there's something other practice or what you recommend.
Yeah, I think some great points there. One is convenience, right? Sunscreen tends to not be convenient. It can be occlusive. It can be hot. And so aerosol sunscreens, people like those because they're easy. They're kind of cool when they go on, which is nice in the hot weather. But there are some risks with that, and poor coverage is probably the biggest one. So just make sure you have adequate coverage. Some techniques people have talked about: do one spray, come back 10 minutes later, do another spray, just to ensure that you got adequate coverage.
Sure. That makes sense. Thank you. I wish I could talk for hours with each and every one of you, but I want to go back around the room one more time to see if there's any other final tips or if we've missed anything. And so, Rob, I'll start back with you. Mr. Pietras, what other final closing tips do you have for the audience?
All right. So in closing, sir, the most important thing is remember it's not the lake. Plan ahead, be prepared, hydrate. It's important that we hydrate and have fun. My family's going to have fun this weekend and every weekend, so do the same.
Always good tips right there. I appreciate it, Mr. Pietras. Thank you. Dr. Lynn, how about you?
A good and final tip this summer would be to please keep all of your medications locked away and in a safe place. A lot of teenagers are at home without adult supervision, and they are really just out there curious, looking for something to do. Let's not let it be our medication.
Yeah, that's a really good tip. I appreciate that, Dr. Lynn. And Lieutenant Colonel Wilkison, how about you? Any closing thoughts?
I think the last thing I'd add is hundreds, if not thousands, of sunscreens on the market. Just pick one you're going to use. That's the best sunscreen, the one that you're actually going to use. It's going to protect you from the sun.
Oh, that's great. No, I appreciate that. Well, this has been awesome. I want to thank my guests again for joining me today. Certainly we could spend hours talking about safety, but I think these are some of the high points that are good for us to remember. This area is so wonderful. Fort Novacell, the area, local area, obviously the Wiregrass is just a very wonderful area to be in terms of a family. And if you're new to the area, so many things to do local, but man, how fortunate we are to be just a couple of hours from the beach as well, and to be able to go down to all these amazing places to enjoy the sun and now to be able to do it safely. So I want to thank again our audience and our listeners for dialing into us again. Just a reminder that if you haven't liked our Facebook, we want to encourage you to follow us on that venue. This is, of course, broadcast on Spotify and Apple as well. This is Lieutenant Colonel Holt signing off again and reminding you that the only way is forward and your healthiest chapter is ahead.
The Lyster Health Talks podcast is produced by the Lyster Army Health Clinic's Public Affairs Office at Fort Novacell. Join us in August as we talk back to school. Stay healthy, Fort Novacell.